Welcome to another episode of AI Innovators Podcast. Today with us, we have Rohit Rao. Rohit is the CEO and founder of Segmind. And from what I know, Segmind makes it easy to use generative AI models in the cloud. So, yeah, welcome to the podcast, Rohit.
Thanks, Prashant. Super excited to be here with you. And we've been kind of looking at Salad for the last 1 year, using it in some aspect. And it's pretty good to kind of talk to you finally.
Yeah, glad that we're able to collaborate on this podcast. To begin with, the name Segmind. It's very unique. And where did the inspiration for that come from and why?
So we started around 2020, just before pandemic. And both Harish, who's my co-founder, and me were working on segmentation problem, which is like a part of computer vision problem, which helps you segment a certain aspect of images. My co-founder was working on cancer cell segmentation on microscope images, and I was working on detecting rivers and land spaces using satellite images. So that pretty much was the kind of the story about the seg coming in the Segmind. And the mind was basically, I was pretty, I was following DeepMind pretty deeply. And then I was like looking for .com domains. And I'm like, hey, segmind.com is available. So let me just go ahead and book that.
Nice. Getting the right domain name is oftentimes it's just the luck of the draw, but also a huge challenge, right? We've got salad.com. We had to pay a princely sum for it. It's interesting that you mentioned that your co-founder was doing cancer cell research and you were doing research on rivers. So how did that shift happen from doing something for the greater good? Shifting from that to images, like AI generated images. How did that shift happen for both of you? And do you still get the same sense of satisfaction that you are doing something, that's impacting the everyday person?
Absolutely. I mean, the impact that we see is, of course, in a different industry. We are pretty excited about the way things are going to change in marketing and, especially the visual AI side of things that's happening today. But having said that, I think the foundation to both the generative AI, as we call it since 2022, is pretty much based on GANs, or generative adversarial networks, which was kind of the foundational research work that my co-founder was doing. So GAN networks were in research for, I think, over a decade. But in segmentation, research, we found that GANs were doing a lot better than like traditional ResNets and few other models. And for us, nothing changed much except that we had to build a different layer on top, but the foundational layer still remains the same. And I mean, as far as the drive's concerned, I mean, when Harish was working on the medical AI side, I think the biggest blocker that kind of, was a bummer kind of a thing was there's a lot of FDA approvals and so on and so forth needed. The gratification took like 7-10 years to come. Whereas the field we are in right now, I mean, if a model gets created today, I can use it tomorrow, and not a lot of, red tape to kind of cross before we start.
That's an answer that I didn't think I would hear today, that especially the instant gratification part. Now, what was the catalyst for starting Segmind? How did you and your co-founder meet, and why did you pick to solve this problem?
I mean, we've done a few pivots, so we didn't start with solving this problem, which we're kind of looking at today. But when we met in around 2019, 2020, I had come out of my previous startup, which was in drone data analytics space. And we were already building pretty huge models for different use cases. And Harish was also building, large image-based models for cancer detection. And a common problem that we both had was using these cloud providers such as AWS and GCP and Azure for both training and deployment, right? Salad is a testament to what I'm going to say, but they're super expensive, right? So when they're super expensive, you better expect like them to work out of the box, right? Like you just want to throw data and say, hey, go train this model. That's what my expectation is as a CTO, because you're already asking me like millions of dollars in cash. But then there was a lot of friction in using these cloud providers, right? This setup that I had to do. And also these cloud providers weren't really built for machine learning, deep learning set of jobs, right? They were built for like apps and databases and servers and so on and so forth. So I'd built an early version of an abstraction layer where, like, as a data scientist, you really didn't have to know whether, if that GPU is from AWS or GCP or Azure. The company decides, and a lot of times they would decide based on how many credits they have left, because they couldn't afford this cloud anyways. So they wanted a mechanism to use all these 2 or 3 cloud providers together with a common interface. So that was the early version of Segmind. We kind of helped you store data across different clouds without having to look into which exact buckets they are in. Then we started solving for compute problems. You could just ask for a GPU instance with Jupyter, with all the requirements set up for your experimentation. So we started building that tool set for a data scientist, but we also saw that, Azure and AWS and all of these guys were also building towards that. And they had so much more firepower to sell than us, like a too many. That was an initial version of the product. We earned like a couple of $100,000 on that platform, but it wasn't really growing at the rate that we wanted it to grow at. And as a startup, you really want to kind of grow fast and show that traction to yourself and to investors and to all the stakeholders. So that's how we met. I demoed an early version of that product, and he said, "Hey, I have the same problem at my medical AI startup." 6 months down the line, he's like, I am more excited about that because until that doesn't get solved, I don't think medical AI is getting solved because we need to make training and inferences faster. So yeah, that's how we joined me, and then we both started working on creating different set of solutions. So that was the first version. The second version was a compiler, which was basically an X project. Which sorry, yeah, that was an X project where he's built a small compiler that would basically take these uh, visual AI models and make them much faster for inferencing. It was called Volta ML. And Volta ML became popular once we introduced stable diffusion optimizations. And I think it took 1 or 2 seconds to generate images on stable diffusion in 2022, right? So that basically caught our attention, and we started seeing that, hey, this is day zero for like the image generative AI, and we are the leaders. NVIDIA was connecting with us, Wombo AI, a bunch of other startups which we were always looking up to were connecting with us as to, hey, how did you do this? So then that turned into like a serverless, Volta enabled serverless APIs so that people can start using fast APIs. And then we kept on kind of doing minor pivots to where we are today.
Exciting. That's exciting. The reason why Salad started also was a lot of companies who are looking at the alternative clouds like Salad, for example, today do come to us with the exact problem that you mentioned, which is we had a whole bunch of free credits and now they've run out, and now we really can't afford what we're spending on the hyperscalers. So we need to look at alternatives. Let's take a step back and just, if you could describe to the everyday person, what does Segmind actually do? Right? How would you describe that?
So what we're trying to do is create a single platform for developers to discover, test, and integrate these models, right? There are a bunch of new models coming in. There are a bunch of platforms like Hugging Face being the top platform where hundreds of open models are launched or released. And then, of course, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the curtains in a closed source company like OpenAI, run by ML, so on and so forth. As an end user, let's say you're a marketer and you really don't go to Hugging Face every day. And you hear about these video models or image models once they become popular, right? But what if I told you that today on Segmind, you can actually discover the latest models that's on the visual AI side, which is marketing related. You can actually use them. Like you can just put in a prompt and say, hey, generate this image, or you can take an image and say, change my post. There's so many types of models that are there. And if you want, you can build a custom app based on that, right? Like, for example, take this photo and make my hair longer or make it look blonde and things like that. So we wanted to solve for developers, but then the side effect is even a non-developer can kind of use this model in a much easier fashion. So today, in short, discoverability, testing, and integration is what Segment solving for developers at visual AI level.
You're absolutely right. As a marketer, I am using AI tools pretty much day in and day out. There's a space that I don't think many marketers as well, or even many people who are not developers, I don't think they even understand today that there's a place like Segmind where they can actually go and be at the cutting edge of their craft and actually use these models to generate something that they can use in marketing or sales or any of the other fields. So so you've been a founder 4 times so far, right? Did I get that correct?
Yeah, I mean, one of the startup was basically rebranded. So I think on LinkedIn it's 4, but technically it's 3.
Okay, okay. And so how easy is it to be a founder, or is it even harder today? Because all of a sudden you have this ambiguity of choice, right? You have an explosion of models, so you're always out there chasing the latest model and trying to see what you can do in terms of that. So, Dale, what's the difference that you see between being a founder pre-generative AI, like pre 10 years ago to now?
I mean, keeping generative AI aside, I think it's much harder to kind of be a large company's founder today because I think there's so much competition in the market that everyone's kind of building a very similar app very soon, right? and all thanks to generative AI and a few other kind of advancements that we can just take an AWS machine, you can scale millions of calls. So there's not a lot left in building a moat, right, per se. Or the definition of moats are changing, and it's pretty hard to kind of see what the new moat could be. So the targets are moving much faster. And as a founder, like if I was starting 10 years back, I could be in peacetime like 4 months a year. But today, probably 2 weeks a year is all I get, to be in the peacetime zone. So it's becoming harder, but at the same time, I feel like building smaller companies is easier. Like having a lean team, like just three, four, five people, building hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. Uh, I think the initial momentum is much, much easier compared to before. Like getting to like 1 million ARR was really, really hard, like 2010. But today, I think 1 million ARR is pretty easy to achieve if you do the things right. But then starting to grow from 1 to 10 to 100 to, if 1 billion is where it's becoming harder. That's the difference I see today as a founder.
That's an interesting distinction because it's teams reach out to us, for example, and we're often shocked by how small the teams are. It's usually just a couple people or mostly under 5 or 10 folks, and they are teams generating probably 10 million images a day or running through a million hours of calls or more every single day. So with the moat then, so AI is kind of level the playing field today that anyone, with a reasonable amount of knowledge and with some AI tools can get to that initial barrier of 1 million. To go beyond that, where do you think the moat is then going to come from in the next 5 years for a lot of these companies in the AI space?
I think a big moat I'm seeing is in data space, right? Like having access to unique data sets that helps you build unique models that other people can consume. Like, for example, from drone point of view, like since our previous company, my previous startup had a lot of drone data, we hypothetically could have built a model that not a lot of other people have, and that could be selling at a premium rate. So I mean, having said about the growth, I think now that you have, the AI models becoming much more intelligent and fine tuning becoming easier, I think now you can go to $1 billion revenue with a single person, but uh, you'll have to wait for that viral moment, right? It's not like a founder has done something unique that made that company successful. Like, I mean, a traditional company 25 years back, it grows slowly and the founder's working hard year on year, and then it grows. But I don't see the founder role that important as we go along, because you just are waiting for that viral moment and you're building up to that, and then the market kind of makes it viral on some day.
That is interesting. One of the key things that we always think of in today's day and age is infusing some sort of virality into everything that we do as a marketer. And now today, conversations have shifted to the point where marketing is actually sitting with product teams and figuring out, okay, we're launching a newer product. What are some viral features that we can actually building? What is something that people can actually use this and then people can share and then others can use? I think the AI profile picture generators, they were one of the I've seen a few of them do it really well on social, where if you make a AI profile picture of yourself, like a LinkedIn profile picture, you're going to share it and say, this is what I did and this is the tool that I did it with. So, all right. One of my quotes, at least with the startup space, that I really love is that every great startup has had a great setback from which, they have to come out of. Sal's had one. We've all had one. Is there something about Segmind that comes to mind immediately? And if so, how did your team overcome it?
And there are a lot of setbacks that keep coming, and as a CEO or at least the founding team, I think your role is just to fight it out. You just keep on fighting it out till you kind of end up at a better place. Uh, we've come across situations where, I mean, I think 1.5 years back, I was literally writing an email to everyone that, hey, I don't think there's any more money left. And we haven't achieved like a good product market fit. So we might have to just shut down. Just FYI, I'm trying my best to kind of raise. And then luckily, one of the investors agreed, whom I was talking to, and he agreed like overnight. Like I spoke to him today, and then tomorrow morning, he's like, hey, I like the founding team. I like what you're building. So, I mean, there's nothing you can do much to like come out of setback. You just have to have really good conviction that what you're building is of true value, and even if it doesn't work, you've given it all, right? Philosophically speaking, like you don't have to like take it too much to your heart. Like
Nice, nice. Let's talk about the initial days of Segway. How did you get your initial users? And Are there any actionable advice that you would give for other founders that are starting in this space in terms of figuring out, how to go around getting your initial users?
think the golden rule is build what people want, like how Y Combinator says. Like I think you need to know what people need. Like for example, we discovered Salad because we wanted GPUs at cheaper costs, and it was okay if we used consumer GPUs because not everyone was a enterprise user back then, right? So I think need is what you need to know, and for us, it was since Harish kind of open source Volta ML and Stable Diffusion was something that people were looking for. People just found us on GitHub, and then we found this like really small 400, 500 developers to whom this library meant a lot, right? And from there we kind of started expanding our use cases and the product of features that we were supporting. So back in the day there were hardly 300 or 400 people who were using Volta ML, and we weren't earning from it. Like it's not like it's an open source project, so it's not like we can charge them for anything. So we tried a lot to figure out how to monetize it. But I think the easier thing, luckily, was that we knew who our audience was, what did they want. And I mean, those 400 people would still remember Segmind and VoltML. And even today, I think hopefully they will at least talk about, how Segmind's kind of evolved from where it was. But we get that free 300, 400, word of mouth people to spread our name.
That's I love the story that the initial traction just came from a research project that you did in open source. Something that's useful to your audience definitely seems like a good strategy, at least from the initial getting the initial user's perspective. Oftentimes I have founders coming to me to talk about the initial marketing of what should I do? I've built a product. Now I want to get it into the hands of users. What should I be thinking of? And I think one thing that I'm going to add in my actionable advice to them is obviously just look at giving the market something that can actually provide them value at a low cost or for free. And then that's where initial users is going to come in.
Yeah. One thing also I've learned is that if your team is building something exciting and maybe it's not aligning with your vision, but it's in the same space, like just let them do the experimentation that they want to do. So it was kind of the next project that kind of took off, and then we got an opportunity to restart with the Clay.
For the team too, getting that buy-in or getting that blessings of the C-suite to actually say, hey, if you're building something useful, just continue building. I trust what you guys are doing. That's actually very powerful.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, so you guys launched Seg MOE this year, right? Mixture of experts. What was the why behind launching it?
So we launched SSD model, which is a digital version. Again, an R&D project that Harish was working on. He was like, I'm hearing from the community of VoltML users that most of these consumer GPUs are not able to accommodate larger models, right? So even, I mean, inferencing is just one part, but a lot of people were training their own models, and you needed like 4080s or 4090s, I think 12 or 14 gigs of VRAM before you can find a state model. So Harish was working on ways we can decrease the VRAM footprint to make it accessible to a much bigger audience, right? And in that process, we released SSD, which was a distilled version of the SDXL model itself. And we saw the images were pretty good. Like even I was like kind of pretty surprised with the quality of images we were getting. And one of the backdrops or issues with SSD was the kind of different images that we would get for the same prompt. In a very simple word, if you keep changing the seed in SDXL, you would get a variety of images, very different looking images. But the versatility in SSD was missing, like because we're distilled, like if you change seed, like it was pretty much be the same phase, just with slightly different angles, so on and so forth. So to solve for that, better versatility without losing the small footprint, basically we created Segmo, which accommodates multiple experts together and chooses the expert based on what you're asking for. Sometimes it uses multiple models together to piece together different aspects of the images. So that was the idea, and we were seeing the same thing kind of being used in LLM space, where I think Mistral was one of the early MOE player where they created like this 8x MOE. I think the default model was 8x MOE model where there were 8 different models powering the final endpoint. So that was the story behind Segmo.
Yeah, cloud providers like Salad and also a lot of our customers were big fans of the work that teams like Segmind is doing. We have enough compute power available at a low cost In Salad's case, right, we evacuated millions of consumer Jeeps. The problem was always the VRAM. Anytime a newer, smaller distilled model comes in, you're opening up access and you're democratizing access to the model to more and more teams, and which is how the ecosystem grows. In terms of AI image generation, uh, could you then say that today the fidelity problem is slowly going away? Even at smaller models, we're getting enough fidelity. So what's the next problem to tackle, or what do you think is the next big innovation that's going to come in AI image generation?
I think we're pretty good with almost all the aspects that were, lacking a year back. I feel like we're almost past the R&D stage of this aspect of technology. Like the IC engine has been invented, there's this two-cylinder engine that just works. I think there's a lot of engineering work that will happen now to make it usable. There's still a lot of R&D happening and improving the quality at an last mile level, where how do you really make it create really good hands or really good eyebrows, or some product which a company wants to kind of promote. But I think 90% of what we need in the image space is done. I think a lot of R&D is happening in video space because now you've introduced this new temporal dimension, right? And that's where I feel a lot of work, R&D work will happen. Also, I think image was the step one. I think the end goal is videos, and then video coordinated with, or that kind of comes with some audio that's relevant to the video. It could be voice, it could be background music or something like that. So I feel like multimodal is where we're heading, where videos and audios become the dominant need in the market. Image was the starting point for that.
One last question was the compute intensive aspect and the sustainability of AI image generation today, right? Like I think there are studies out there that say, for example, generating one image with a model like SDXL. This might be a few months old now, takes as much energy as charging a smartphone or running your fridge for hours, right? It might have, obviously, with smaller models, it might come down, but it's still, energy intensive and also compute intensive. How do you as a founder look at that and figure out, okay, where do you draw the line on your models being energy intensive? Is that something that you're actively working on?
I think the numbers aren't right. I think it's just a myth in the market that it takes you so much energy to create that image. Back of the envelope calculation, even like a year back, even if it took 10 seconds to generate an image on, let's say, A100, which is an enterprise GPU, I think it's rated at 300 watts. So 300 into, I think it's less than a watt, like zero point 0.8 watts watt hours to generate an image. A phone would take like 40 watts to charge, 40 watt hours to charge, right? So I think it's like 40, 50 times more to charge a phone, and maybe 100, 200 times that your refrigerator would use. And this was like a year back, because probably that's where the myth started. I think the myth probably started because of the training aspect. Like I think the business world doesn't understand inference versus training. I mean, I think there's a big difference between like how much energy goes into training. Uh, so training does take a lot of energy, and people are working to make it much better and more efficient. Both from a hardware point of view, I think Grok, or I think it's pretty much for inferencing, but there's a lot of R&D happening in reducing the energy footprint. But having said that, I think even SSD was, the side effect was lower energy consumption, right? The intention was to decrease the time it takes, but directly that affects the energy consumption. So I think all of them go hand in hand. I mean, we know that Intel processors, which x86 architecture, was the first. And then 10, 15 years later, you got ARM, which is like 150th the power. So I think technology will proceed in a way where, you don't have to do too much, or, the ecosystem will make sure that it's not unsustainable, right? Early days, yes, we are spending a lot of energy, but at least it's not going into, I don't know, random stuff like mining Bitcoins, right? Which leads to nothing. I mean, when I started learning about Bitcoin, I was always thinking like, can we do some computation so that not just the Bitcoin is mined, but some aspect, let's say a DNA sequence is also solved for parallelly, right? So I feel like it's not that high, and it will come down like by 10, 20x. I think the inference cost itself for ChatGPT has come down like 180x or something, if I'm not wrong. So 5 years from now, I don't think we'll be talking about the cost of these things. And NVIDIA also kind of, the supply versus demand for NVIDIA is so high that I think 5 years later that pressure valve would have released.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad I asked this question first, because one of the questions that I also want to ask you was, misconceptions around AI image generation, right? And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that AI image generation leaves a huge environmental footprint, and that's something that I think as an industry, all of us have to continuously work together to actually educate the public on what it actually costs to generate images and how we're all doing our part intentionally or as a side effect to just mitigate that.
Right, right.
All
I
right.
mean, the open source ecosystem also kind of makes this faster in a sense that we are heading faster towards efficient models. So we just released Fast Flux, which is the fast version of Flux, which takes around 0.7 seconds or 8 seconds to generate an image. And there are three levels of Flux models. So there's Schnell, which apparently means fast in German. And then there's Dev and there's Pro, right? So Pro, of course, takes a lot more time and energy to generate an image, but that's being used in like very professional environment. You're not using Pro to generate something on your phone. It wouldn't work. So it all depends on what use case it is. Like you can be taking a huge truck, but you're not going to an office. You're probably mining out there. That's why you need that huge truck. So because of the open source kind of movement, we're seeing like a lot of options available, and you can choose what option is the most optimal for you.
Rohit, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. It's been a pleasure having you here. And yeah, we look forward to seeing Segmind come up with even more models and helping make generative AI, more accessible to all of us.
Absolutely. Pleasure talking to you as well, Prashant. Hope to connect with you soon. And I'm excited to see how, we can work together with Salad.
All right.
See you.